Unless you live under a rock, you have probably heard of MCP, Model Context Protocol, from Anthropic. You probably think you need to start working with it, but maybe you don't know how to start. In this video, I'm going to show you how you create a platform you can use for MCP and other technologies as they come along, as well as give you a way to automate some of your other tasks. It's using a platform called n8n. And once you get it all set up, it's really easy to work with. This video is a very comprehensive tutorial of all the steps you need to go through to set it up and get started. MCP is a standard for a way to write and share tools to use with AI. For now, the main way you leverage them is in AI coding tools, but using tools like n8n, you can also use the thousands of MCP components in any workflow you build to automate whatever you want to do. Maybe you want to generate new content for social media or build an application that integrates with Slack or anything else that you can imagine. n8n with MCP lets you build almost anything without even needing to know how to code. That said, if you spend just a few days learning even the basics of how to code, you can go so much further, so much faster. So what is it we're going to set up here? First, I'm going to walk you through setting up a VPS. I did that before in another video, but this one will save you about $200 over a couple years. We'll spend a little bit of time securing that server to protect your resource from bad people on the internet. On that VPS, we're going to install n8n, and we're going to connect it to a free service called Tailscale. This will let me run Ollama and other tools on my main laptop without going through any special hoops. And we're going to expose n8n to the world using Caddy, which will enable a secure connection over HTTPS using a certificate. We're going to also go through a few extra steps to ensure that it's really easy to add other services to our VPS, like SearchNG and Firecrawl and NoCodeDB or Buddhabase or so many others. As with most of my videos that involve any specific tasks that you need to do, this one has a GitHub repo with all the resources and commands. It's called HomeLab, off of my org, which is called Technoevangelist. To set up our VPS, we're going to use a provider called Hostinger. I always used to use a company called DigitalOcean for servers up in the cloud. When they started, they were orders of magnitude cheaper than every single alternative out there. But now, they're actually really expensive for what you get. And I have a special code that you can use that'll make your costs even lower on Hostinger. More about that soon. Here's what I was using for my previous setup. One virtual CPU with 2 gigs of RAM, 50 gigs of SSD, and 2 gigabytes of data transfer. For that, I was paying DigitalOcean $12 a month, plus $3 a month for weekly backups. And I was already hitting a bunch of those limits. But I was curious if one virtual CPU on one platform was the same as one virtual CPU on another platform. So I did a quick test with Geekbench, running it on my DigitalOcean Droplet and on a single virtual CPU Hostinger KVM. Unfortunately, Geekbench didn't even work on my DigitalOcean instance. But I found another result that is identical to my setup, just using Debian instead of Ubuntu. So let's compare the two. As we can see, they aren't equivalent. Although both are a single vCPU core, I am getting a far more powerful chip on Hostinger for far less money. I really did not expect it to be cheaper to get a much better system. If it were just a couple of bucks different, maybe I could justify it because of my long experience with DigitalOcean, but the price difference is just too significant to ignore. For 1 month with DigitalOcean, I get 3 months of a better machine with Hostinger. Now, as you can tell, I'm pretty impressed with what I'm getting here, so I was especially excited when they offered to sponsor this video. But they aren't seeing the script before I post, so this is really what I think about it. So thank you, Hostinger, for helping me do what I do. So let's get this set up. First, visit the Hostinger website at hostinger.com/mattw. That's MATTW. The only thing special about that link is that we are able to see how many come to the website from this video. That brings us to the page about VPS hosting for n8n. A lot of providers offer a lot of choices when you set up a server on their platform. How many vCPUs do you want? How fast are they? How much RAM and storage? How much data transfer do you need? Easily 1,000 SKUs to support there. But Hostinger keeps it simple. There's one option with 4 different possibilities. There's KVM1 with 1 vCPU core, 4 gigs of RAM, 50 gigabytes of NVMe disk, and 4 terabytes of bandwidth. KVM2 doubles all that. KVM4 doubles what KVM2 had. And KVM8 is another doubling. And that's it. My DigitalOcean setup was definitely hitting many of the limits every now and then. So since it's still a lot cheaper, I'm going with KVM2. For all the services I'm planning to run on this machine, I think that'll be the sweet spot. Again, that's 2 vCPU cores, 8 gigs of RAM, 100 gigs of NVMe disk space, and 8 terabytes of bandwidth. And that includes weekly backups. So select that and click the button. The next step is to figure out how long you want to keep the server running. With most providers I've seen, you consume their resources, and at the end of the month, you're charged for what you used. And most setups I've done have stayed up for 2 to 4 years. DigitalOcean charges monthly, but Hostinger charges for the month or a year or 2 years, and it gets cheaper the longer you pay for. You're going to pay that up front for that time, and there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. Next, choose the server location. Hostinger has data centers all over the world. I'm choosing the closest one to me, which is in the US. The next choice is what you want installed on the server. Right now, I see that I have 11 choices for the base OS. Click on any of them and you can choose the version. There's also OS with panel, and this installs an OS with something like Docploy or Coolify to make it super easy to deploy custom projects you build. There are a lot of panels available, most of which I've never heard of. But then you can choose specific applications. There are so many choices here. 2 of them are n8n. The first is the main n8n setup, and the other one, I think, is if you're going to build a cluster of n8n servers. If you choose the regular n8n setup, you can be up and running in about 3 or 4 minutes. It'll install Docker and provide a Docker Compose file to spin up n8n. It'll also create a subdomain under the VPS server name, which is pretty neat. And no matter what you choose, you can always reset the machine to another option later as well. What we're going to set up here in this video configures n8n a little differently. I just wanted to have a clean setup, so I'm going to choose just Docker. At this point, you want to click the link that says you have a coupon code. Your coupon code is MATTW, that's MATTW, which is my name. This is a special limited time deal to get an additional discount for all yearly plans. Then click Continue. Now you can either register for a new account or log into your existing account. If registering for a new account, you can enter your billing address and payment information. Now continue. On the next screen, you enter what you want to use for a root password. Enter a good password and save it to your password manager. Then you can add a public SSH key. If you already have one that you want to use, then add that. Otherwise, there's instructions on how to create one. Then click Continue. Now finish setup and your VPS is being created. If you don't have a domain to use, go ahead and create one. You can do that here from the Hostinger dashboard. I'll assume that you have one, so go on to Manage VPS. At this point, we have a working VPS or virtual machine up in the cloud. We're going to go through a bunch of steps, and if you feel like you've screwed anything up, you can always come to OS and Panel, then Operating System, and choose OS or OS with Panel or Application again, and totally reset. Most tutorials at this point would take you straight to setting up n8n. But it's really important to secure your machine, no matter what platform you use. So go to Security on the left and then Firewall. Add a firewall and give it a name. we need to add at least one rule for the firewall to work. We're going to have a web server in a little bit that responds on port 443. And we need port 22 to continue using SSH. So click the three dots on the right and choose Edit. Now under Add Firewall Rule, choose SSH for the protocol and click Add Rule. Then choose HTTPS and add rule again. Now go back to the firewall window and enable the firewall. Now people can only access the server on port 443 and 22. Now hit the browser terminal button at the top right and we are SSH'd in to the server. This is a nice convenient way to get started. It's a good idea to not do everything as root though. Although there's usually an Ubuntu user on Ubuntu OS, I like to create a user with my name. When I first prepared for this video, I was going to have you do everything, but I decided to automate the preparation work. So the first step is to clone a repo that I created. Git clone https://github.com/technoevangelist/homelab.git. Now go into your new homelab directory and run less prep.sh so that we can see what it does before we run it. Up at the top, we make sure errors fail the script. Then I make sure ZSH is available to work with. Fish is better, but ZSH is good enough and probably more familiar to you. Next, it prompts you for a good username and password. The script doesn't save this and just uses it to create the user. Now make sure the user doesn't already exist. Then create the user and enable it to run sudo and docker. Since we added your SSH key to the root user, copy that public key to the new user as well. Enable ZSH. Then make sure you can't SSH in with a password or as root and don't use PAM. Then restart SSH and move the homelab directory to our new user directory. Now run that script to set it all up. That's /prep.sh and it'll do all those things. Now you might think this is a bit of a hassle and maybe a reason to use another platform since you haven't had to do this elsewhere. Well, this is basic stuff that you should do on any instance in the cloud. I don't know if you know this, but there's some pretty shady characters on the web. And if you don't do these minimal steps, you may be asking for problems. Now, if we SSH, then username at the IP address of this hosting or server, it might still not work. This could be if the key is not in your keychain on your OS. You could use SSH add to add it, or I just like to create an entry in my config file in my .ssh directory. So now I could just run SSH video and I'm in. Now that script did a lot. And if you have any questions about why it did what it did or how to manage your VPS as you use it, be sure to also check out Caddy in the Hostinger dashboard. This is a free AI that you can use to help you work with Hostinger. But everything else in this video is going to be a lot easier going forward. So now we need to change gears a bit. I want to access my Mac from my n8n setup so I can leverage my GPU. I also want to add some other services to my host that are accessible to me and no one else. So to achieve that, I'm going to use Tailscale. If you don't have a Tailscale account, go to tailscale.com and create an account. It's totally free unless you need more than 3 named users. After creating an account, install the Tailscale client on your machine. Then in the Tailscale admin page, go to Settings, then Keys, then Generate an auth key. Enable reusable, and then generate the key. Copy the key to your clipboard. Now back in the terminal on your VPS, navigate to the directory of the user's home directory called .config. And in there, create a new file called tsauthkey and paste the key into the file with nothing else in there. This is the key that you'll use to add our Docker containers to the tailnet. Now, in the Tailscale admin page, go to Machines and click the button to add a device and choose Linux. Then at the bottom of the page, click Generate Install Script. Copy the script and go back to the VPS, paste in the command. This will add the VPS to the Tailscale tailnet. Now, navigate to the homelab directory, then n8n. edit the .env file, setting n8n host and webhook URL variables to be whatever you want to use. One of my domains that I like to use and that I own is tvl.st. So I'll set mine to n8n.tvl.st. So now take a look at the Docker Compose YAML file. You can see there are two services. First is n8n. This is pretty close to the standard Docker Compose file for n8n, except I'm getting the environment variables from the .env file that we just edited. Then the second service is n8n on HSTGR, or Hostinger. If you want this to be called something else, you'll need to change the hostname in this service and the network model in the n8n service. That's how they connect. Everything else in this service is going to be the exact same for every Docker-based service you want to have on your Tailscale tailnet. We'll see this in later videos. Below services is secrets. This loads the TS auth key that we created just a few seconds ago. I'm loading two different types of files into this Docker Compose file. There's a .env file and a secret. Secrets can have a single piece of information per file, but they can be located anywhere on the host's file system. env files can have lots of information, but they have to be in the same directory as a Docker Compose file. If I want to have one single copy of the Tailscale auth key, I have to use a secret. This just makes that part easier. Now we can add lots of Docker containers to the tailnet and not worry about the key. Now that TS auth key is loaded from the file in the secret section. Then in the n8n on Hostinger service, I declare that the TS auth key secret should be loaded. That's added as a file to /run/secret/TS auth key in the container, which is then read in the TS extra args environment variable. Now I can run docker compose up to start n8n. This will take a few seconds to pull the image and start everything up. Now we didn't add -d to that command so we can see any errors if they come up. At this point, you should see n8n on Hostinger show up in the list of machines in Tailscale. We can confirm it works by copying the IP address of that machine in the Tailscale admin, then pasting it into the browser and adding the port 5678, and we should get this screen that basically says we need to use HTTPS. It's worth noting that this is the IP address on the Tailscale tailnet. This is different than the IP address we used earlier to SSH into the server. So let's take care of that next. My domain, tvl.st, is hosted by Cloudflare. So I'll go to the Cloudflare DNS for that domain and add an A record for n8n pointing to the IP address of the Hostinger server, not the tailnet address. Back in the SSH terminal, press Ctrl-C to stop the container, then run docker compose up-d to run it in the background since we have confirmed that it works. Now go up a directory and down into Caddy. Go to the Caddy file directory and then edit Caddy file. Now edit that file and put in your real domain on the first line. Now run docker compose up-d to start Caddy. Then in your web browser, go to the address you put in the Caddy file. This might not actually work right away. Caddy will act as a proxy and show the content from n8n on Hostinger instead, and it adds an HTTPS certificate from Let's Encrypt automatically. Getting that cert requires a few back and forth calls with Let's Encrypt, and I've seen it take a couple of minutes. But eventually, after a few page refreshes, you should see a page like this that lets us set up the first user. So enter your email, first and last name, and a password and click Next. When you get in, go to Settings by clicking the three dots at the bottom and choosing Settings. Go to Usage and Plan and click the link to unlock. Enter your email and click the button. You'll get some nice bonus features in the product when you sign up. It's totally free too. While waiting for that email, go to Personal and click the button to enable two-factor authentication. This adds a bit more security to our server since the login is on the public web. And while we're securing that, do the same thing in the Hostinger admin panel to add two-factor there too. Let's do one more thing before we start to use n8n. Navigate to homelab/watchtower. Edit the .env file, and if you live anywhere other than on the west coast of the US, enter the correct time zone there. Now run docker compose up-d in that folder. What this will do is pull the latest version of every container image on this machine and then restart those containers, ensuring that you're always running the latest software. It does this at 4 a.m. every single day. I wouldn't do this in production for a company, but since this is a personal server, it's perfect. So now that we have a working n8n server, we can move on to using MCP in some MCP client. This could be Claude Desktop, or Cursor, or Windsurf, or lots of other places. I'm going to work with Windsurf. First, let's expose some tools using n8n that we can then consume in Windsurf. So click the big icon in the middle of the n8n page to create your first workflow. Now click the plus sign to add the first node. Type MCP in the search and choose MCP Server Trigger. Now there are a few things we can do here. First, notice the URL in the middle. It's got our n8n server URL, then MCP test, and then a long GUID, and then SSE. This is a test URL, but we can click on production URL to see what that looks like. It just removes test from the middle, but this isn't available till we activate it. The long GUID can be replaced with any path name you like, perhaps my MCP. Anyone who has the new URL can use any of the tools you can configure here. So it's a good idea to add authentication. You can add bearer authentication or header authentication. Let's go with bearer. Then create a new credential. Type in the token string you'd like to use. For this simple example, I'll use ABC123, but you really should use a good long password here. Now, click back to Canvas to close this window. Below the MCP server trigger node, click on the plus sign for tools. These are the options we have for tools to add to our MCP clients like Windsurf. We can add any arbitrary JavaScript or Python code, any RESTful API call, any other workflow from n8n, but then scroll down. There are lots of vector stores, and then almost any other integration that is available in n8n. You could make specific rows in an Airtable available, or information from Asana, or an S3 bucket, or Cloudflare, or DHL, or Discord, or any command on your file system, all your emails. This list just goes on and on. But let's keep this first one simple. In the search, type calc and choose the calculator. Click back to Canvas, toggle inactive to active, and click Save. Now go back to the MCP server trigger, choose the production URL, and click on the URL. This will copy it to your clipboard. Now on your machine that has Windsurf or Cursor installed, go to where MCP is configured. And we get to something that is a little bit annoying with Windsurf. In fact, it may be the one advantage Cursor seems to have over Windsurf at the moment, though that may change. While you can use SSE with MCP in Windsurf, you can't enable authentication like I think you can with Cursor. So your MCP server has to be wide open, which is a bit of a problem. The solution to this is to use MCP Proxy, though I've also seen examples using Super Gateway. MCP Proxy seems to be a bit more straightforward to use. So create an mcpconfig.json file with the following content. This is going to run MCP Proxy, pass an argument that is the URL to your MCP server, and specify the bearer auth token. Now save that and click refresh, and we should see our server show up with the calculator tool. Now, if you want, you can add a second tool. So add it to n8n. Maybe we want that date time tool. Back in Windsurf, click the refresh button and we get that tool added. And that was pretty easy. In n8n, you could also add other MCP servers, though with the built-in MCP node, you're restricted to SSE servers. If you really want to use a standard I/O MCP server, which unfortunately is more common, check out the community node n8n nodes MCP. I'll go into more detail on that in another video. But that's pretty cool. There is so much more you can do with n8n, and I really want to spend a bit of time in some future videos showing you what you can do, as well as showing you how to set up some of the other services I plan to add to my hosting or VPS, like SearchNG and Firecrawl, Perplexica, maybe Buddhabase or NoCodeDB, OpenWebUI, and, well, so much more. As you start working with n8n, one of the new features is going to be incredibly useful for you. You can find out more about it in this video here. Check it out, and remember, when you sign up to Hostinger, to use that special limited time deal to get an extra 10% off any plan. That code was MATTW, M-A-T-T-W, which is my name. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you soon in the next video. Goodbye.